Very excited to finally bring you my in-game version of my Barrage Rogue build. I've gotten character level 80, and I'm pretty happy overall for the character's at. Except for gear, my gear is pretty mediocre, so keep in mind that you can have a lot more damage and even more survivability than what you can see in the background footage here. And an extra reminder that there will be full unedited Nightmare gameplay footage in the description and the comments below. Ready to go check that out. Now that said, this build still feels great, does a ton of damage, and has a lot more survivability now, especially after the Umbral aspect got buffed. Much more consistent Dark Shadow generation now, and I've just built a lot tankier in general. Definitely shored up those survivability issues I mentioned before, and it feels amazing. It's actually pretty hard to die, unless you start getting, 20 levels or more above you. In terms of enemy level, then, armor scaling kicks in really hard, and if you're playing careless, it's very easy to die. But of course, that's kind of standard. That said, not waste too much more time, let's go ahead and get into a basic gameplay breakdown and wait the rest of the video. The basic gameplay of this build is actually really simple and can basically be summed up with pop imbuments, spam barrage. And honestly, most of the time that's good enough. You don't even have to really worry about stacking up your combo points. Unless you're very under leveled, most elites are just going to die instantly, even at a basic level barrage. You don't really have to worry about it too much, but obviously if you do want to set up your maximum damage, you do need to hit 3 punctures, or just 1 if you get lucky, condemnation, to get your 3 combo points, and then you'll fire 3 extra arrows. Obviously you can fire at any point, and you'll get 1 extra arrow per combo point, but you really want to do either, I would say you either want to get 3 points, or you don't want to bother. In my opinion, maybe if you just want a little bit extra damage, you can weave in like 1 puncture in between barrages, but more work than I'm willing to put in. But basically, as you start a fight, remember that imbuement skills do on cooldown the moment you activate them, but obviously you can hold the imbuement for as long as you like. So you can actually, when running from one group to the next, you can pop your shadow imbuement, and you'll have it off cooldown by the time you get to the next group, possibly. Basically, you approach a group of mobs, maybe throw a puncture or 2. You're kind of sitting at mid-range at this point. Fire out your shadow imbuments. Anything is still alive, either pop your next shadow imbuement, or you can pop your chill imbuement. Finish off anything. If there's an elite, you may want to run up to them, shotgun them to death. But pretty simple overall in terms of just general mob clearing. Now, for bosses, it's a little bit different. It's not complicated, but basically, you want to start with chill imbuement, and it's probably worth stacking up your combo points in between each shot. So basically, do 3 punctures. Make sure your ice imbuement is first. Fire your first ice imbuement. 3 more punctures. Next ice imbuement. 3 more punctures. Do your shadow imbuement. 3 more. Don't forget that shadow. You can basically just drop poison trap whenever, and it has a chance to reset your imbuement skill cooldowns. I don't really worry about this too much. I don't try to purposely time it to always have both my skills on cooldown. It's just a nice bonus, but the main purpose of poison trap really is the critical strike chance bonus, for me at least. If you want to worry about it more, obviously you can do so, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Now for Shadow Step, I'm going to warn you against using this immediately when you get frozen or something, when you immediately get crowd controlled. I would wait a little bit. If you're following my build setup, you have a lot of survivability, especially while crowd controlled. So you may want to save that Shadow Step, just let whatever freeze or stun is on you just wear out. Basically, don't pop Shadow Step until you actually think you're in danger. Otherwise, there's a very good chance, especially in later Nightmare dungeons, that you're just going to get hit with another freeze, another stun, some other type of crowd control. There's a very good chance you're just going to get hit with another one. And then you're not going to have any source on Unstoppable, other than you have eluding on, falling back on elite. Keep in mind, don't waste your Shadow Step too early. And that's pretty much it. Build plays very simply. There's not really too much to worry about. The combo points is really the most complicated thing, but obviously that's pretty simple. You throw punctures 3 times and you do more damage, and you get more bolts. Very simple, right? That's going to be it for the basic gameplay. Next, let's go ahead and talk about the gear. Now, your overall stat priority remains the same as the previous version of the build. Vulnerable damage, critical damage are your main damage stats. You want as much as you can get everywhere you can get it. You can actually get quite a bit more than I have here. I just haven't had terribly good luck. And of course, since we are reliant on crit strikes, you do need some crit chance. I would say 20% is enough, but obviously more is better. You get a lot of critical chance from the skill tree, but it's nice to have a good solid buffer for when you don't have all those effects active, of course, right? Now, defensively, I've been really heavily leaning towards the max life, just, plus flat max life, and damage reduction percentage is what I have found has been worked the best for myself. Unfortunately, resistances are pretty bad. They scale very, very, very hard. It's hard to really justify investing too into these. The only elemental resistance I would really consider worth it if you just really felt like you really wanted to would be poison resistance, just because poison is very, very strong. Enemies often, give you like multiple health bars worth of poison damage in a hit, it feels like, right? Other than that, damage reduction from close, damage reduction from distant, both very, very good. Damage reduction while injured, also very, very good. In your armor, you will want to slot in Topaz to get damage reduction while control impaired. This has probably saved me more than anything else. These are very, very, very good. Make sure you slot these in. 10% each with the Royal Topaz, so 50%. Very strong. Definitely has done a lot to keep you alive. And then finally, again, this is just a personal recommendation, but I would recommend stacking a bunch of movement speed. It makes the game feel so much better to play. Really up to you. Now, getting into uniques, Condemnation, of course, is very, very, very strong for this build. Definitely want to have Condemnation. At this point, if you're reaching level 70, level 80, you should have gotten this drop at least once. If not, just simply run another sword. Now, in the previous versions of the build, I did use the Penitent Greaves, because this is a very strong effect. It's very, very good. But I have found that in high-level Nightmare dungeons, there's too much crowd control spam to really get away with it, or at least it feels a lot better to me to have the eluding aspect on my boots instead, right? Even in an imprinted version like this with a 40-second cooldown has probably saved me quite a few times. Just feels really good to have a big 4-second window. Because 4 seconds is usually more than enough to clear the entire pack, right? So it is a personal choice. I'll leave that up to you. If you don't even have the Penitent Greaves, just use an eluding aspect boots. But if you do, you'll have to make that decision for yourself. This will obviously give you more damage output, but I just didn't feel like I needed it, to be honest. It just kind of felt like overkill. I even feel like even though I have pretty mediocre damage stats, this build, the one thing it's not lacking is damage, right? Now, getting into the weapons, obviously again, a crossbow for the vulnerable damage implicit, and the 4 stats you want on this are going to be crit damage, vulnerable damage, crit damage with imbued skills, and 4 skill damage are the 4 stats you want. You see, I've actually only got 2 of those on my current one. I've had very bad luck getting a good crossbow, so I'm gonna get way more damage out of the build than I currently have at this level. Now for your sword, damage or stat priorities remain the same. Crit damage, vulnerable damage, damage with imbued skills, and core skill damage are the things you care about. And if you don't have Condemnation, just use another sword. Same priority. The damage per second on the sword or Condemnation do not matter at all. You don't care. These are only stat sticks. You don't care about the damage from the... Getting into the jewelry. With the amulet, you can kind of go one or two ways here. You can lean more offensively or more defensively. Personally, I've opted to go more defensively, and kind of like the stats I'm looking for here are going to be movement speed, damage reduction from distant, damage reduction from close, and then kind of anything else good, to be honest. Cooldown reduction is probably the big one I would recommend here. I've got imbuement skill cooldown reduction, but anything useful there pretty much. For your rings, I would say you actually want kind of one or two different things. I would recommend having max life on at least one of the rings personally. Other than that, vulnerable damage, critical damage with imbued skills, and crit chance. But I would recommend having max life on one of these personally. Up to you if you want it on both, but I would say max life on at least one. You can get a good chunk of max life on your ring. Again, totally up to you though. And again, you do want skulls socketed into your jewelry. And I forgot to mention this, but emeralds into the weapons for crit damage to vulnerable enemies. Now, getting into armor, much the same as before. Critical damage reduction from close, damage reduction from distant, max life. Maybe if you want some max armor percentage, movement speed on the boots, of course. On your gloves, you are going to want probably attack speed, crit chance, crit damage, imbued skills, and ranks of barrage. Can't really think of anything else that's going to outvalue this particular role here. You are looking for something like this on the gauntlets. And everything else, again, is pretty much just stacking as much damage reduction as you get. There's not too much useful you can get on the helmet from that wise. So what I've gone for here has been max life, total armor, basic skill, attack speed is very nice for the build, and then just some all stats. If you need a specific stat, you need a bunch of, you can replace it all stats with something else. Maybe get some stats on the boost as well instead of like what I've got here with the cold resistance. But overall, pretty much just stacking damage reduction on the armor, except for the gloves, of course. Except for the gloves are your big offensive one on the armor. And that's pretty much it for the gear. Now let's go ahead and talk about the legendary aspects. Starting with aspects that need to be in certain places. First, of course, is going to be the Umbrous aspect on the amulet. On lucky hits, critical strikes can give you a free Dark Shroud Shadow. Did get a recent buff in the most recent patch where one on the amulet is now 60 to 90%. This is very, 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 very strong. Very consistent now. Feels great. Then on the crossbow, you do want the Edge Masters aspect because it does get doubled on crossbow. This is a ton of damage. Generate a ton of energy on this build. So a lot of times you are basically getting the full benefit from this. So a ton of damage. Now, all the other aspects can go anywhere you want them to be. Just make sure you've got all of these aspects. First, of course, is going to be the Chiefs aspect. Damage reduction from crowd-controlled enemies up to 25%, down to 15%. Very good. Tons of damage reduction. Some movement speed. Feels good. Just a bunch of damage reduction, right? An aspect of Might. Same thing. 20% damage reduction after using your basic skill for 2 to 6 seconds. Very, very good. Combo points build. Your basic attacking all the time. Free damage reduction, basically, right? Aspect of the Expectant. Attacking enemies with your basic skill gives you a damage multiplier for your next core skill. Again, a combo points build. You want to be using like generally at least 1 to 3 basic skills between most casts of Barrage. So this is just a ton of free damage. Nothing to complain about. Aspect of Disobedience. This is the only real form of armor stacking on the build, other than that one total armor stat line. But this is just a ton of free armor. You can stack this up very easily on this build. So generally in the middle of combat, this will be staying at either close to or at 100 stacks for the full 25 to 50% extra armor, right? If you're not running Penitent Greaves, you're going to want to put eluding on your boots. This is just 4 seconds of unstoppable if you become, you reach injured. That's 35% HP or below while you're crowd controlled. Saves me all the time if I'm getting like freeze chain, stun chain, stuff like that. 4 seconds is generally more than enough to clear out a pack of elites. So you get low, you become unstoppable, you wipe the whole pack, you're good to go. Then we want Aspect of Branching Volleys. This is just extra arrow, extra arrows, right? After it splits or after it ricochets, it can become 2 arrows, right? Very, very, very good. Aspect of, or the Rapid aspect, I mean, basic skill, attack speed. Obviously, because we are using basic skills to stack up our combo points, we want these to be happening as fast as possible. We want a bunch of basic skill attack speed. Of course, we do want the Rapid aspect. And then aspect of Arrow Storms is kind of the odd one out here because this is actually not something you use offensively, but rather used defensively. This is mostly used for stacking up Aspect of Disobedience and for activating your Siphoning Strikes passive. Does work for both of those. It's very good. Even if you get frozen or something, if you've got some Arrow Storms active, you usually don't have to worry about it because you're healing so much and you just constantly have so much armor. Very, very strong defensive aspect, surprisingly. Can replace this with the Aspect of Corruption, I believe it's called. Check. Yes, Aspect of Corruption. You can replace it with that if you want, but personally, I would recommend Aspect of Arrow Storms. If you don't have Condemnation or you just don't want to use it, probably put in Aspect of Corruption there instead. But that's going to be pretty much it for your aspects. Now, let's go ahead and move on into Skill Tree finally. The first, for our basic skill, we do want to use Puncture. Take that out, of course, to enhance Puncture for the extra bit of energy generation, and to Fundamental Puncture, that the guaranteed vulnerable application if you don't already have the exploit glyph. To get your guaranteed ricochets started on Barrage to get your bolts moving around. Moving on to your core skills. Of course, this is a Barrage build. You want 5 points in Barrage. Take that out to enhance for the guaranteed ricochets, and then advanced for essentially 20% extra crit damage after your first Barrage. Especially if you've got vulnerable, you pretty much always have this active. You're stacking up all your combo points. You fire 8 bolts, 8 arrows. It's very, very, very easy to get advanced barrage activated. Basically just guaranteed 20% crit rate all the time. Now for the passive skills here, you want 1 point in sturdity to get out to 3 points in siphoning strikes. This is your big source of survivability on this build. Of course, alongside damage reduction, just constantly regenerating tons of HP. Very, very, very strong. Moving down to our agility skill, we do want Shadow Step for that unstoppable access. Take this out to enhanced and to discipline for the cooldown reduction. Shadow Step, this is basically always going to be active, so you can essentially just take 3 seconds off this cooldown. And then you want 3 points in weapon mastery for the free critical strike damage with crossbows. Very, very good. Moving on to subterfuge, 1 point in dark shroud, out to enhanced with the chance to not consume it, and then finally to subverting, or the movement speed increase when you have them. This is very nice. And also this just isn't really necessary and is not active often enough, I would say, to really be that useful. Kind of a personal choice, I guess, but personally I prefer the movement speed, and frankly I just don't need the crit chance. Don't need it. And then poison trap, of course, take this out to countering poison trap for the chance to reset your imbuement skill cooldowns. Since we're using 2 imbuement skills, this is absolutely massive when it does pop off. And then for the passives here, we want 3 points in exploit, extra damage to healthy and injured, then malice for just for vulnerable damage. Very, very good. Moving out to imbuement skills, shadow imbuement, take this out to mixed shadow imbuement. This is just free extra damage, like elites and stuff that stay alive for more than 1 shot. Very good. And then blended shadow imbuement is pretty nice early game when you don't have a ton of vulnerable application, but at this point you should have the exploit glyph and plenty. You should have more than enough sources of vulnerable that you just don't need this. And then cold imbuement, take this out to enhance and to mixed cold imbuement. Tons of extra damage with cold imbued skills. And of course, for our passive, you want frigid finesse for more damage to shield and frozen enemies. 3 points in precise imbuement for just a free 9% crit rate. And then 1 point in shadow crush and at least 1 point in consuming shadows. This second point here is basically free. You can do whatever you want with it. You can put another point in dark shroud. You could put a point in 30 for a little bit of damage reduction. You could put a point in stutter stat for a little bit of extra move speed. You could put Alchemist Fortune for 5% more lucky chance. That's actually pretty nice for Barrage. 8 bolts, which what would, instead of 16, 21% lucky hit. Actually pretty good. So lots of really useful things you can do with that 1 point. I've kind of left it here because I just haven't decided. I'm kind of leaning towards Alchemist Fortune for this point, but you can do whatever you want with it. It is basically just a free point. Now moving on to the ultimate, obviously here we're just taking some passives. 3 points in innervation, 30% chance to gain 8 energy on lucky hits. Very, very good. 3 points of trap mastery, just 12% crit rate after using poison trap, and after it activates. Then minus after it activates. Very good. The vulnerable and crowd controlled enemy things is basically irrelevant, because all enemies are basically always those when you're playing this build. Moving on, adrenaline rush. Just 1 point here to get access to 3 points in haste. Very good. Either 15% attack speed or 15% move speed. Very good. And then finally, 1 point in precision. This is kind of the only real good option for this build. Guaranteed crits. Keep in mind that when precision does activate, it activates for the entire skill use. And it does work for both Barrage and Puncture. I wouldn't really worry about tracking it too much. But when you do get this active on Barrage, all arrows are a guaranteed crit, and they all increase critical strike damage. Very, very, very good. And that's pretty much it for the skill tree, of course. Now, let's move on to the Paragon Board. For the Paragon Board, I'm just going to go over what 5 boards I've chosen really quickly, and then we'll talk about glyphs afterwards. Not really going to offer any alternatives here because there would just be too many options to go over. Kind of take what I've got as like a general guideline and kind of the kind of stats you're looking for, stuff like that, right? But obviously, the first board is going to be the Cunning Strategy board. Just come right up to the starting node. Starting board, come up here. And this board is for 2 things. One is a really early to access glyph socket, and the legendary node here, Cunning Stratagem, is quite good. And we'll want to get that eventually. Depending on how many points you have to spare, you could come up and get these nodes as well. Basically, just come through like this. If you don't, just, kind of get there as few points as possible. But then take the left gate out. You're going to notice all the boards are the left gate. Just go straight left, pretty much. One line to the left. Before your second board, Tricks of the Trade. There's a lot of damage nodes here that we really like. A little bit of damage reduction from close enemies as well. Nice free damage reduction. Right across. More, survivability nodes. A bit of extra armor. Glyph, of course. Some damage to elites. Nope, just free damage. We love that. Come on across. Then we got the Eldritch Bounty board, Build Skill board. Very, very good. Tons of damage that I get here. But first, come here, come down. Get some Build Skill damage. Get that glyph, of course. Come up to back to the center of the board. Get this more non-skill, non-physical damage. Basically, imbued skill damage with this build. Take it on across. Got some survivability nodes here. Bit of max life, a little bit of potion healing. Kind of up to you if you want to spend like the extra point here or not. Doesn't really matter either way. It's just like 2% max life. And then, once again, out the left gate to the next board. And the final board, no witnesses. And this will be the final board of the build. And then, obviously, come straight out, get the glyph socket, and fill in for stats. I haven't actually finished filling in stats for the glyph I have here. But basically, once I finish filling in my stats here, next thing I'm going to do is get Eldritch Bounty. Come up and grab that. Maybe later, if I've got the points to spare, I'll grab these imbued skill damage nodes. Lots of free damage right there. And then finally, I'll come up and get the Cunning Stratagem node like I mentioned earlier. Possibly get these points if I can fit them. Other than that, it's just going to be filling in stats once I get these to level 15. But I haven't actually gotten any of my glyphs to level 15 yet. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to need to fill in a little extra stats in their radius, right? And that's pretty much it. Now let's go ahead and go over the glyphs. The first in the starting board is going to be the combat glyph. Bunch of critical strike damage. That's a big multiplier. And a little bit of energy restoration, right? Very good. Nice little bit of extra sustain. Tons of free damage. Next is going to be the exploit glyph. When obviously vulnerable damage is very good. Well, tons of damage. And it does let you get that really, really easy vulnerable application on the first hit. 3 seconds. Although it's got a 20-second cooldown per enemy, of course. But this just lets you really easy set entire packs of vulnerable and kill them very, very, very fast. For your next glyph in the Tricks of the Trade board, you are going to want the Ranger glyph. Marksman skill damage. Obviously, Barrage is a marksman skill. Free damage. And it does give you some more damage reduction while you are using, well, you do have your crossbow out. And keep in mind that does mean when you're using puncture, when you're throwing puncture, you do not get that damage reduction. This is mostly just so you can kind of sit there and just spam Barrage a little bit safer. You can switch this out for something else if you want. Anything that you can get damage here that fits in, the points that stats are available here. I'll get the words out eventually. But once you've got whatever you want to choose there, the next glyph is going to be the Infusion glyph. Very, very, very good. Tons of imbued skill damage. Really leaning heavily into imbuements for all our damage pretty much. And you get a little bit of cooldown reduction on it. It's not a lot, but it helps. And finally, for the last glyph is the Control glyph. I actually don't have all the stats filled out for this, but just baseline, it gives you a good chunk of damage to crowd-controlled enemies. Remember, that includes anything like blows, chills, freeze, stuns, anything like that is a crowd control. So you've got plenty of that on this build. Be active pretty much anytime it matters. And then, obviously, it does give you a nice, juicy, extra damage multiplier once you've got the stats filled out for it, as I don't, but I only need 2 points to get that filled out. And that's pretty much it for the Paragon board, and that's it for the build. Just a reminder, if you want to see full, uncut gameplay footage for the build, it'll be linked below in the comments and the description. That's it for this video. If you've got any questions, you should put them in the comments. I'll try to answer them best I can. I'll catch you guys in the next video.